Second Samuel. Now, we want a little review, because remember, this was Absalom wanted permission to go down to Hebron and fulfill a vow. You remember he came to his dad, King David, and asked, "Can I have permission to go away, Dad, and go to fulfill this vow that I've had for 40 years, never fulfilled since I came back?" David said, "Go." But what did we think were the real intentions? Not real honorable, right? He was planning something. And so he has how many men in chariots going in front of him? Absalom. 50 men to run before him in verse 1. And we talked about that, I think it was pride. He wanted to be king. And you remember how he would stand out before the gates, and when anybody came with a case to see the king, what Absalom do? Yeah, he kind of cut him off, interceded, and said, "Hey, look, you got a good case there, but you're not going to be heard by King David. Man, if I was king, I'd fix your case right now." And then he also would take them, remember, and give them a kiss on the cheek or something that was in here. And it says, all this attention he gave to the people did what? What was the effect of that?
Stole the hearts.
Stole the hearts of the people. Stole them from allegiance to King David, who seemed aloof and apart. And they started following Absalom because he seemed to care about them. And he was there with them. So he asked David if he'd go to Hebron, and he went down there to Hebron, and King David gave him permission. And then in verse 10 of chapter 15, Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron." Wow. So this is pretty much an act of treason. Although there is a king, he wants to be king, and he's saying he's going to reign. And we talked about why he picked Hebron, because that was the original throne for David for 7 years, the first 7 years of his reign. He started out in Hebron. So he says, well, I'll start out like he did. And so in verse 11, with Absalom went 200 men invited from Jerusalem, and they went along innocently and did not know anything. What's that say? What do you think that means?
People have a tendency to blindly follow a leader without finding out what the heck is going on.
Yeah, so they were blind followers. Perhaps they did not realize he was going to want to take over the whole country. They liked Absalom. They thought he was a good person. They go along, and all of a sudden, here's an act of treason. They are involved in it. And we'll see, are they really that strongly behind him? And we'll see what happens. So, verse 12, and Absalom sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, from his city, from Gilo, while he offered sacrifices. And the conspiracy grew strong, for the people of Absalom continually increased in number. So he's gaining followers. The word is out. And why? There must have been something about David. Again, maybe he just seemed too aloof from their situation.
I'm getting older.
Huh?
I'm getting older.
Getting older.
He only ruled for 40 years.
Yeah.
And, so now he has a son that's making an upward movement.
Yeah, so the younger
In all
people...
fairness to the son, he does have some bona fides. You know, he is the king's son. So
Right.
these people might be attuned to that fact.
Yeah, so he thinks he needs it right now, even though there might have been rumors that Solomon was going to actually take over. Even then, there probably was rumors to that effect. But Absalom is pretty much arranging things for himself. Yeah.
Just a little side here. Gilo. That is the valley where David slew Goliath.
Where David slew Goliath. Uh-huh. So he's getting a lot more supporters. He's getting a lot more followers. The conspiracy is growing stronger. So in verse 13, a messenger came to David saying, the hearts of the men of Israel are with Absalom. Notice how he said that. He didn't say, Absalom's trying to take your throne away. He says, this is more than one person. It's the hearts of the people are behind him. So that would automatically challenge David and make him think, well, maybe I have not been faithful in getting the support of my own people. In verse 14, so David said to all his servants who were with him at Jerusalem, arise and let us flee, or we shall not escape from Absalom. Make haste to depart, lest he overtake us suddenly and bring disaster upon us, and strike the city with the edge of the sword. Wow, this is something. Yeah.
Well, can't we see quite a contrast from when David was a young man and just went out to face Goliath, relying on the Lord completely, and now he's actually turned a little bit, and now he's afraid of his own son. I mean, he does. Is that a portion of the man just gaining in age and so forth? It's interesting that being so zealous as a young man, he's now afraid.
Getting,
He was never afraid before.
yeah, and I wonder too if maybe Nathan's prophecy is still ringing in his ears about the sword will never depart from your family, and he's saying, "Oh my goodness, this prophecy is truly becoming real now, and I see it. I sinned. I confessed my sin, but Nathan said, God won't take your life, but you got to bear consequences of that," and he sees it. Paul.
He could be just pragmatic here, and also does not want to fight his own son. He still might have it, and no man could beat that boy. So I don't know what his mindset is here, but knowing David and all he's gone through, I don't think he's afraid.
Well,
He
yeah.
might just be taking a better, exit as opposed to fighting.
Yeah, I think he doesn't want to fight with his son. He loves Absalom. We'll see that. Absalom, Absalom, he cries out later. He doesn't really want the fight. This verse here, arise and let us flee and escape, reminds me of some of those scenes from the World War II movies when the headquarters hears the enemy's coming and they start a fire and burn all the papers. Can't you just see David burning all the royal papers, and all the assistants are scampering around, getting ready to flee. They're leaving the headquarters. They're leaving Jerusalem. They're taking off. The enemy is that close from Hebron. So here they are. That's because I like old war movies.
Now they just erase emails.
Huh?
Now they just erase emails.
Yeah, he's saying, yeah. I can just see them all with their sledgehammers crushing the hard drives before they leave. So, well, let's go on. Verse 15. The king's servants said to the king, "We are your servants, ready to do whatever my lord the king commands." So those around him were pretty loyal. So then the king went out with all his household after him, but the king left 10 women concubines to keep the house. Well, that's it. You got to leave the women to keep the house clean. But this goes back to Nathan and a prophecy he made. And why don't we look at that? Let's turn back to chapter 12, verse 11. Chapter 12, verse 11. And would somebody read out loud that verse 11?
Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up adversity against you from your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie in the sight of his son.
Okay, so little did he know it'd be a son, not just a neighbor. And this is going to come true. He's already got, the household is in an uproar. Adversity has happened. But here we're going to see the concubine's kind of a half-wife, if that's a term. And he's leaving those 10 there, and they're going to take... And we're going to see what happens with Absalom here. But remember that prophecy from Nathan as we go on. So verse 17, and the king went out with all the people after him and stopped at the outskirts. Then all his servants passed before him, all the Kerethites and the Pelethites, all the Gittites, 600 men who had followed him from Gath passed before the king. It's almost like he's having a review here. He's standing, and I'm kind of a Civil War buff as well, and I remember going to Appomattox reenactment of the end of the signing of the peace treaty, and a fellow in garb as General Lee was on his horse, and they had all the men in uniform marching past him. He just sat on the horse watching them. And we can kind of picture David. Maybe he's on the donkey or whatever, or he's walking. But he stopped, and he's watching all his... These were fine warriors. These were brave men, the 600 and everything. The elite were walking past him. And you can imagine how he's recalling and remembering more glorious days in his past. And he's wondering, is this the end? What has the Lord done to me? And he's reviewing them as they pass before the king.
I would just like to remind my friends here that General Lee did not really surrender. He was too fine a Southern gentleman to ask General Grant for his sword.
Okay. All right. Well, it was... and Grant didn't ask Lee for his sword. But we can talk... We'll have our own Civil War chat room here later. But what we're doing here is seeing David in our minds, picturing him. And let's look at 19. Then the king said to Ittai the Gittite, "Why are you also going with us? Return and remain with the king, for you're a foreigner and also an exile from your own place." What's his own place? Where's a Gittite from? Gath. You remember Gath? That's where the Philistines were. And here was a man from Gath who was a follower of David. And what's David telling him? Go back. You don't have to follow me. You're not even Israelite. And he says in 20, "In fact, you came only yesterday. Should I make you wander up and down with us today? Since I go, I know not where. Return and take your brethren back. Mercy and truth be with you." Well, there's a kind-hearted king. He's telling him, you don't have to follow me, because where am I going to go? I don't even know where I'm going to camp every night. You go back. You don't have to do this. And look what Ittai answers him in 21. But Ittai answered the king and said, "As the Lord lives, and as my lord the king lives, surely in whatever place my lord the king shall be, whether in death or life, even there also your servant shall be." What Old Testament woman does this remind you? Ruth. Doesn't that come right to your mind? Ruth said, "Wherever you go, I will go. Your people shall be my people." And she followed, was it Naomi? She followed her. So this is a loyal subject, the Gittite, a foreigner, part of David's followers. Yeah.
Kind of reminds me also of what Peter and the apostles were telling Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, that they would die with him and be with him through death and whatever. Kind of a parallel there, I think.
Yeah, and then they all fled, too, didn't it? Yeah. But it's kind of a similar situation. Yeah.
Is this yesterday metaphorical, or is that actual, is literal, you think?
Well, it could be either way, but I'm thinking it's probably metaphorical. It means real recently.
Yeah.
You just came, because apparently he knew him enough, etc., etc. And but we could take that he was pretty recent, and David said, "Don't risk your life."
How, if it was, and I believe it probably is too, that how much it was emphasized by, hey, it was just yesterday. And it might have been a year ago, might have been, it been a while anyway, I'm sure.
Well, that's the way it is with us, isn't it? Seems like just yesterday I was feeling young and spry. Yeah, Jim?
Just to follow up though on that scene in the Garden of Gethsemane, you said they all fled. I think they were ready to fight for the most part, but Jesus stopped Peter and they,
Right. Uh-huh.
he said, "Satan, get behind me." I mean, if Jesus would have been had not have been willing to give himself up, I think they would have stood and fought with him. So I
Well, they were. Yeah, he said, "Get a sword," and he goes, "Here's a sword. We're ready to fight." And we don't know, but it does fulfill the prophecy in Zechariah, I believe, where it says, "And they struck the shepherd, and all the sheep fled." And that was a prophecy they used here for Jesus, that people just weren't with him. So there's well, we'll go on. I was thinking of a movie about Peter, and he was in Rome, and they were being persecuted, and the disciples told Peter, "You better flee and get out of here before you get killed, because we need you, Peter." So Peter was on his way out of Rome, and he met the Lord coming back into Rome. He said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Peter, I'm going back to be crucified again." And Peter realized then he couldn't leave, and he went back. This is a story, and I forget, there's a Latin name to this movie. You've probably seen the movie. But that's it. We have a tendency to want to protect our own selves and our own bodies. And sometimes we think we can be strong and brave, but I wonder how brave we would be, like if we were those Syrian Christians or the Iraqi. And it's something we need to think about before it happens. We need to be prepared. But when the time actually comes, we can be as prepared as we think we are, but still we might not be. So we just have to depend on the grace of God and Jesus Christ. Horrible situation. I mean, we talk about tribulation. Well, those people are going through a great tribulation right now. And we see it more and more, not only in the Middle East. You see it in Nigeria. You see it in Africa.
See it, Detroit.
The Boko Haram, or whatever they are, killing. And you just see this increase of Christian tribulation in the world. And we're kind of in our cocoon here, aren't we? We're kind of isolated from that, Jim.
Yeah, we are in a cocoon here. We have it pretty easy here in this country. We're not really being tested for the most part. These people over there, they are flat being tested. They're being boiled in oil. They're being drowned in steel cages. We know all the other stuff, and they are willing to give themselves up for their faith.
For their faith.
And so it makes me wonder, how many of us, when really put to the test, are we going to whip out, or are we going to stay to faith?
Yeah, and I think, I don't think we're going to get our heads cut off here. We could, but I think what you're going to see is an increase in, bad-mouthing Christians, isolating Christians, removing them from the public forum and making things more difficult. So we have, I think the time, what was the phrase, for the sunshine soldier and the summer patriot is passing as far as Christian goes. You have to be all in or all out, if you know what I mean. That time of persecution is coming. So we need to build each other up in the faith and in prayer, know the sword of the Spirit that we have, and be out there trying to win more people for Christ and doing the work of Christ, because I think the window of opportunity is closing on us if we're actually seeing what's happening around us. Paul?
I'm thinking of Stephen when we're talking about this and how he reacted. It's very similar to Jesus. Don't you think that each person that is tempted to that point, that God gives us that ability to withstand that temptation, that persecution? He gives us that extra strength that we might think we don't have, and we don't as humans.
Yeah, that's it's not us. If we stand strong, it's through the Holy Spirit, it's through God. Remember, Jesus said there's coming a time when you're going to be arrested and you're going to be taken to court and you're going to have to stand in front of the tribune. And he said, don't be thinking about what you're going to say now. Wait until that time, because the Holy Spirit will give you the words to say. So we know that in faith we will be given what to say at that time. But, the Holy Spirit says in John 15:16, He helps recall to us the words that Jesus said. So He's not just going to put them in our mind. Maybe we have to be reading it and have had it somewhere up there. So when the time comes, the Spirit will help us recall it. And that's just good any time, whatever you're going through. Keep the Word in your heart. Memorize it. And when you're going through difficulties, the Spirit will help you recall what you need from that. So that's why we do these things too. But yeah.
The quotation that all things work good to those that love the Lord. I knew a preacher that argued against that. He said, that person dying, he's been a good Christian all his life, he's dying with his cancer, he's in terrible pain. But do you believe it or don't you believe it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the simplest things that we can put our faith in, that regardless of circumstances in this world, that it will turn out for good if we love the Lord.
Well, that's right. Our citizenship is in heaven, from which we're waiting the Savior, and He could come any day. Okay, where were we?
Verse 22, 21.
And then yesterday,
I think
22. Okay. So David said to Ittai, "Go and cross over." Then Ittai the Gittite and all his men and all the little ones who were with him crossed over. So what does that mean? They crossed over back into Jerusalem, or they crossed over with David?
That means his whole family with the little ones and
Uh-huh.
everybody.
Yeah, and that neat. The little ones were with him.
So they all crossed over later, so evidently it meant, step over this line if you're with me.
Yeah. So he went and crossed over. So 23. All the country wept with a loud voice, and all the people crossed over. The king himself also crossed over the brook Kidron, and all the people crossed over toward the way of the wilderness. So you see, they're all going east out of Jerusalem, down the bank where that brook Kidron is, up the other side, on the east side, and the Mount of Olives is over there. The Garden of Gethsemane is going to be there. So they're all passing out. They're heading east, southeast out of town. And then verse 24, there was Zadok also, and all the Levites with him, bearing the ark of the covenant of God. And they set down the ark of God, and Abiathar went up until all the people had finished crossing over from the city. Well, here they're bringing the ark with them. And these are Levites, the only ones who are instructed to carry the ark. And they set it down, and I think it's kind of like so the people can be encouraged, because they believe that God sat over the ark, the mercy seat, and that He was with them. It's a sign of God's presence. So the people are leaving Jerusalem and home, but they see that God is with them because the ark is there, and they're encouraged. But then wait and listen what happens. Then the king said to Zadok, "Carry the ark of God back into the city. If I find favor in the eyes of the Lord, He'll bring me back and show me both it and His dwelling place. But if He says thus, I have no delight in you, here I am, let Him do to me as seems good to Him." So he said, look, the place of the ark isn't just with me. It's got a place. I prepared a tabernacle for it. Take it back to where it belongs, because if God favors me, I'll be back there someday with it, hopefully soon. But if not, then God's going to deal with me, despite if I have the ark with me. This statement from David, where he says, if he says, I delight in you, okay. If he says, I have no delight in you, all right. Either way, I'm okay. Reminds us of a prayer, doesn't it, of David for his ill baby? And when it died, what he said to his servants afterward? Remember when they questioned him and they said, How come you were fasting and wouldn't come out while the baby was sick, but now that it's dead, you come out and you want to eat? And you remember how he replied to them? He said, "Who knew that God may have granted my son life? But now that he's dead, he can't come to me, but I'll go to him someday, and I need to go on with life and eat." So it's kind of like the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. I'm not going to complain. It's the Lord's will. I prayed. He didn't answer my prayer the way I thought He would answer it. But blessed be the name of the Lord. We've got to go on in life. And it sounds that this attitude comes through here again as he's leaving. with the ark. And he says, take the ark back and leave it there. Whatever will be is God's will. So I think you see a real trust in God still in David, even throughout this. Yeah, Paul?
Isn't it what you call faithfulness? This seems like that is what David is. He is faithful.
He is faithful. That's right. Yeah, okay.
And once before, the ark had fallen into the hands of the Philistines. And we remember the story of it being brought back. And I was fortunate enough to be on an armed bus with an armed guard to go into the West Bank and see where that original tabernacle had been and the path by which the ark was returned by the Philistines. So David wasn't going to allow this ark to fall into the hands of the enemy a second time. And the Kidron Valley is where Armageddon will take place, and it's directly below Mount Carmel, where Elijah had faced off the pagan sun god worshippers and said, where is your God? And in the Hebrew it actually says, has your God gone to the toilet that he cannot hear you?
Okay, well, we've got some differences there because some say that the Battle of Armageddon will be up north on the plains of Megiddo, where Carmel is. But this brook of Kidron is down in Jerusalem, southeast of that. So there's some differences in variety of geography. But the main thing is, I think, that David is faithful and he's trusting in God's will. And he's saying, it's almost like he's saying, God's with me, whether that ark is with me or not. And here's a new insight, isn't it? God is kind of weaning the people away from these things. And God is spirit, and we'll trust him. So, anyway, I thought that was interesting. So,
Pastor,
yeah.
there is the thought that the ark didn't guarantee God's presence. There was no guarantee that just because you had the ark there that God was going to do something specific. And I think that's partly where David was coming from. It was God himself and not the ark. The ark was a symbol of where he would meet God.
And I think we see that's more of a slow progressive development in that, because years ago they did kind of think that and they took it with them in battle. But now we see they're learning. God's helping them see this. So the king also, in verse 27, right? The king also said to Zadok the priest, are you not a seer? Return to the city in peace, and your 2 sons with you, Ahimaaz your son, and Jonathan the son of Abiathar. See, I will wait in the plains of the wilderness until word comes from you to inform me. So it's like he wants Zadok to be his spy. Does it sound kind of like that in one way? You can inform me through your sons and see what's happening, because I need some eyes on the situation so I can see what's happening. So he's a seer, a prophet. He's an insightful man, and David needs him to be with him. So 29, therefore Zadok and Abiathar carried the ark of God back to Jerusalem, and they remained there. So David had even more behind this idea of returning the ark. He wanted the men to go back there. And if anybody saw Zadok and his sons coming back without the ark, they'd say, what's going on? But with the ark, no one would be suspecting them. So they took the ark back and said, oh, good. Zadok's back and the sons, and they're bringing the ark back. And maybe Absalom can be a good king now. But they're going to be informers for David. So he took the ark back to Jerusalem. They remained there. So David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives and wept as he went up. And he had his head covered and went barefoot. And all the people who were with him covered their heads and went up weeping as they went up. Kind of a sad scene, is it not? He's got to leave Jerusalem. He's leaving, and all the people with him. They thought the future had been assured, but not now. And he's going up and he's ascending up the Mount of Olives. What a famous spot in the Bible. The Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus was there. And Jesus, on the ascension, where did he ascend to heaven from? The Mount of Olives. And the 2 witnesses that were with him told the disciples, why are you staring up into space? because Jesus is going to come again, just exactly the same way that he left. And did you know that is prophesied in the Old Testament? And I'd like us to turn to Zechariah. Where is Zechariah? Zechariah 14. We can turn to Zechariah. Okay, it's right before Malachi and after Haggai.
Zechariah what?
We're going to look at 14, Zechariah 14. This is almost to the New Testament, right? Zechariah 14. And if someone could read the first 4 verses of Zechariah 14, 1 through 4.
Behold, the day of Yahweh comes, when your spoils shall be divided in the midst of you. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity. But the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. Then shall Yahweh go forth and fight against those nations, as when he fights in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east, and the Mount of Olives shall be cleft in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west, so that there shall be a very great valley, and half of the mountain shall be moved toward the north, and half of it toward the south.
Okay, thank you. So we see here, this is a prophecy that the Lord will come again, and his feet will stand where? On the Mount of Olives. He will stand again there. And prophecy students believe this is after the tribulation. Christ comes again to fight them, and he will stand on the Mount of Olives. And he will come back, or at the second coming of Christ. So anyway, the Messiah will be on the Mount of Olives. And that goes right with the witnesses in Acts 1 who said, the one who left this way, he's going to come back the same way and the same place. The Bible is true from beginning to end. And we can be assured that these things line up as we study Scripture and prophecy. And we are to take encouragement from these as we think things might be going from bad to worse. It's all a part of God's plan. But he's given us the word so we can know the plan and be encouraged and help others know the plan and be in on it. So here we see David going up the Mount of Olives, and all this is going to happen on that mount someday, where he is right now.
What do you think would be the reason that God would do that?
Do what?
Split that valley in two, make it creative out of it. Why would he do
What
that?
do you think?
I don't know. I've thought about that many times. I think obviously maybe to demonstrate his power, maybe to.
Something's come to my mind before is that, in that new temple, the living water is going to flow out of the temple and down into the Dead Sea, and it's going to be a living sea with water. So who knows? It might all fit together.
It's the same principle as the split rock that gushed millions and millions of gallons of water.
So anyway, it's interesting, and we can take encouragement from the prophecies. So, how many have stood on the Mount of Olives? Okay, we've got 2 here. Yeah. Penny and Carrie. Good. Okay, so let's go ahead then. In verse 31, then someone told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness. Now this is interesting. Guess who Ahithophel is? He's the grandfather of Bathsheba. And he might have had some thoughts about David and what happened. So Ahithophel's leaving David's side, and he wants to be with Absalom, the new power that's coming up. But notice here, David is relying on the Lord. He is seeking the Lord's will in this. He's requesting the Lord to help and do this thing. We haven't seen that from Absalom, have we? We don't see him calling on the name of the Lord so much. I don't see it at all. He said he had a vow to make in Hebron, but we don't see much about that. But here David has the Lord on his mind throughout this time, and he's speaking with the Lord and crying out to the Lord. And he wants Ahithophel to be turned against Absalom and give him bad counsel. So in verse 32, it happened when David had come to the top of the mountain where he worshiped God. Here you are again. He's worshiping even as he gets to the top of Mount Olives. There was Hushai the Archite coming to meet him with his robe torn and dust on his head. The Archites were a small tribe in the northern part of Benjamin. They were a small clan of the tribe of Benjamin. And 33, David said to him, "If you go on with me, then you'll become a burden to me. But if you return to the city and say to Absalom, 'I will be your servant, O king, as I was your father's servant previously, so I will now also be your servant,' then you may defeat the counsel of Ahithophel for me." So here he's lining up his spies again, his secret agents, his double agents. He wants Ahithophel to be there and give bad counsel to Absalom, Hushai to give bad counsel to Ahithophel, because he doesn't trust Ahithophel. He needs somebody, he needs Hushai to be on his side in there. So this is interesting. He's setting up his men. David's a smart king. He's not going to be defeated easily in this, and he hopes that it can all come to an end without a lot of bloodshed and the killing of his own family. So he wants to arrange all this. And then 35, "And do you not have Zadok and Abiathar the priests with you there? Therefore it will be that whatever you hear from the king's house, you shall tell to Zadok and Abiathar the priests. Indeed, they have there with them their 2 sons, Ahimaaz, Zadok's son, and Jonathan, Abiathar's son, and by them you shall send me everything you hear." So Hushai, David's friend, went into the city, and Absalom came into Jerusalem. So we've seen how David already sent the priests back, Zadok and his sons with the ark. Now he's sending Hushai back. He's got these people in place in the court. They're going to be all around Absalom. The question is Absalom that dense that he knows that these are spies? These are people that were loyal to my father. Wouldn't he say that? Can I really trust Hushai and Zadok and his sons to be on my side? And that's always the problem in warfare. Who do you trust? And the spies that are there, and who is on whose side, and who is on another side. And do we have top secret communication? Or will that be discovered? So, somebody might follow one of Zadok's sons and see him running out to David and bringing him information. You have to be very careful. So Absalom, I don't think he's as smart as his dad. Does that make sense? Yeah. I don't think he's got it. Yeah.
Or maybe because of his character, then he believes that they could go against David because he may have, because of his character.
Yeah, because he sees so many people coming to his side. He's lifted up as a great and loving man, and he sees, these guys are seeing the light now too. They want to come and follow me now. That's great. I'm a pretty great guy. All these people want to come and follow me. Yeah.
What you call ego?
Ego. Yeah, he's an egotistico. And pride goes before the fall. And we're going to see that here. Well, let's go ahead and get into 16 for a little while here. When David was a little past the top of the mountain, there was Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, who met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them 200 loaves of bread and 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And so, you remember Mephibosheth? Who was he? Jonathan's son, Saul's grandson, who'd been crippled. And David wanted him to stay with him at his table the rest of his life. But here is Ziba. Ziba was a servant of Mephibosheth, but before Ziba was a servant of Mephibosheth, whose servant was he? Saul's. And remember, David said, okay, Ziba and all your servants, now you're serving Mephibosheth. So I wonder if Ziba was that taken with Mephibosheth. Maybe he still wanted Saul and the line of Saul to take over from David. But anyway, can we trust this offering? Is this real? 100 clusters of raisins? Oh, that reminds me of Islamic scholar just recently came out and said, you know how the so-called martyrs that blow themselves up think they'll get 70 virgins when they go? Said the Arabic word is not virgins, it's raisins. Did you hear that? Some of you have heard that. So they're in for a big surprise.
I want to know.
In more ways than one. Oh dear. So, okay. So verse 2, and the king said to Ziba, what do you mean to do with these? So Ziba said, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who are faint in the wilderness to drink. And the king said, and where's your master's son? And Ziba said to the king, indeed, he's staying in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. Whoa. What do you think Ziba's trying to do here? Does this reflect very well on Mephibosheth? No, it's like he's trying to harm the character of Mephibosheth. It's saying, oh, now that David's gone, the house of Israel will restore the kingdom of my father to me. Well, he's got a little problem there because it's not Saul's lineage that's trying to take over. It's still David's son that's trying to take over. So I don't know why Ziba would say this. I think he's kind of making up this story about Mephibosheth. Then the king, okay, so 4. So the king said to Ziba, here, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I humbly bow before you that I may find favor in your sight, my lord, O king. So David didn't even take it. He said, look, I don't want your gift. You go ahead and take that back. So he wasn't going to be beholden to Ziba in the future, where Ziba could come to him and say, hey, remember when you didn't have anything and I came out with donkeys and bread and raisins? So David's not going to fall for that. He's going to keep going on as he was. So now in 5, when King David came to Bahurim, there was a man from the family of the house of Saul whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. Coming from there, he came out cursing continuously as he came, and he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. Well, this doesn't sound like this guy's too wise. Would he come out and start cursing the king and throwing rocks at him when he sees all his army is all around the king with all their armaments and spears and things? Yeah, that's kind of like the suicide by cop thing, those horrible things you see where anyway. 7. Also Shimei said thus when he cursed, come out, you bloodthirsty man, you rogue. The Lord has brought upon you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned, and the Lord has delivered the kingdom into the hand of Absalom your son. So now you're caught in your own evil because you're a bloodthirsty man. Well, it's true that David had blood on his hands, because wasn't that the reason God did not let him build a temple for him? Because he had blood on his hands. So I think David is hearing a little bit of recrimination, self-judgment in there. So yeah, I know that. But then in verse 9, then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Please let me go over and take off his head. Wow. So death wish maybe for Shimei. And he's cursing the king and throwing stones at him. But David's not ready to take his life for this. Because look what happens. Verse 10, but the king said, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? So let him curse, because the Lord has said to him, curse David. Who then shall say, why have you done so? Why would David say the Lord has told Shimei to curse David?
Maybe he thought there was something to it.
Yeah. And it's kind of like, I think David trusted, what they call the sovereignty of God. All things are held in God's hands, and it's all part of a plan. And he sees this man being used as God to rebuke David. And I think David remembers in his mind when Nathan told him, you can't build a temple because of the bloodiness that's in your history. So he hears that from Shimei, and he says, no, the Lord must have told him to curse me.
Pastor, my notes say that maybe David was remembering the deaths of Abner, Shibboleth, and Uriah. So he does have a little blood on his hands.
Yeah, he was an accessory to murder with Uriah, etc., etc. So I think he's feeling the pangs of conscience there through Shimei. And 11, and David said to Abishai and all his servants, see how my son who came from my own body seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjamite? Let him alone and let him curse. For so the Lord has ordered him. There again, he's saying it's from the Lord. And he's reminding these people that Absalom, his own son, is trying to kill him. Don't take the life of Shimei. And then verse 12, it may be that the Lord will look on my affliction and that the Lord will repay me with goods for his cursing this day. Isn't that something? If he endures his cursing, maybe the Lord will bless him later on because he didn't take his life. And as David, verse 13, and his men went along the road, Shimei went along the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went, threw stones at him, and kicked up dust. Wow, wouldn't this make a great movie? I can just see this, Shimei following along the side there, cursing, throwing stones, kicking up dust, and all the armies just plodding along, not looking at him. David's heading on. But, this is not the last we're going to hear Shimei. Let's turn to 1 Kings. 1 Kings, we're going to see where David's on his deathbed. Solomon's king, and he's giving Solomon some last instructions. Did you ever see the movie The Godfather?
Yes.
You settle scores. You settle scores before you leave this life. And I hate to say it, but this is what it looks like if you read 1 Kings 2. And David's on his deathbed, and he has Solomon come in. And would somebody read 2 verses 8 and 9? First Kings 2, 8 and 9 out loud.
And see, you have with you Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjamite from Bahurim, who cursed me with a malicious curse in the day when I went to Manaim. But he came down to meet me at the Jordan, and I swore to him by the Lord, saying, I will not put you to death with the sword. Now therefore, do not hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man and know what you ought to do to him. But bring his gray hair down to the grave with blood.
Okay. So he got his justice. Curse the
You kill him,
king.
but not me, right?
Yeah, you kill him. Because the next verse is David rested with his fathers and was buried. So he had to get this one last commandment out before he passed away. I let him live, but now it's time for him to die. So he asked Solomon to do that. So Solomon had to carry out the wishes of his father and execute Shimei. So it's interesting. First, David said that was from the Lord. Shimei's cursing was from the Lord. The Lord told him to do this. But after years and thinking upon it, he said it's time for justice to be done. Okay, why don't we stop? That's kind of a good place to stop with Shammai's episode. So we'll start in verse 14.